In this video we shall continue to discuss good requirements properties. Last time we were talking about these four properties, and in this, the second video, we shall talk about these ones. So the next two properties are combined into one: obligation and up-to-date state. Any requirement you have should be obligatory and up-to-date, obviously. Otherwise, it should be either removed or reworked. Some typical problems here. Maybe, for some unknown reason, a requirement was added as "why not?" and there is no real need for it. Exempli gratia. Imagine some customer representative for whom we are developing a text editor asks, "Why not to implement a video player inside our editor? Okay, we can do anything with your money, but is it really necessary here? Maybe a video player inside a text editor is not a good idea." The second typical situation is that requirement has wrong priority or importance properties. And that leads to a situation when some insignificant and unimportant requirement displaces other really important requirements. So these properties of requirement, we shall talk about them in the next video, should absolutely have proper values. Otherwise, our attention may be misguided to those requirements that are not really important. And I think the most typical one here: if the requirement is already outdated for any reason. It really happens every day, things change. But it was not removed or reworked. So we should either remove the requirement or rewrite it, rework it to make it up to date. How to detect and fix typical problems with obligation and up-to-date state? Review, periodic review of the requirements. And it is much better if we are doing it with the participation of the customer, because we may get his instant feedback. So this review allows us to notice those fragments that have lost their obligation, became outdated, and so on. How to fix? Rewrite, eliminate, or change those outdated requirements and make sure that everything left is up to date and obligatory. Speaking about feasibility, we rarely have the situation when the customer asks for something technologically unachievable or impossible. Almost never. But what happens often is that some requirement is outside the project boundaries, schedule, budget, and so on. So typical problems here: so-called gold plating, when there is a requirement that is extremely expensive to implement, long to implement, hard to implement, and at the same time it is almost useless for the end users. The good example was provided a couple of minutes ago. It was about a text editor with a video player inside, or maybe even a video editor inside. If we are concentrating on the text editor only, this is extremely expensive and absolutely not needed here. Of course, some requirements may be unrealistic on the present level of technology, such as some extreme high speed of data processing and so on. But as we already said, this is a rare situation. And there is another rare but typical situation, that there are some requirements not to the product but to the user, environment, and so on. For instance, imagine such a requirement that as follows: a user should be able to send an email. How can we influence the user? How can we teach him, make him physically healthy, mentally healthy, and so on, for him to be able to send an email? This is not a requirement for the application. This is a requirement for the user. So it should somehow be rewritten to become a requirement for the application. How to detect and fix typical problems with the feasibility? Here is the only way: experience, experience, and experience. We should use our experience to understand how much some requirement costs and how useful it is for the project. And to understand, is it within the project limitations? If we personally do not have such experience, such expertise, we should refer to some experienced people for their advice. And how to fix such problems? Well, we should discuss the situation with the customer. There is almost nothing else to do. And either we change the requirement or we review the project, maybe making some changes to the budget, the schedule, project borders, and so on. The next property is traceability. Maybe you remember from one of the previous videos when we were talking about levels and types of requirements. We were saying that there is vertical traceability, here is horizontal traceability. Once again, here are the definitions. And typical problems are rather clear. If the requirements has no IDs, structure, table of contents, cross-references, some search mechanism, it is extremely hard to navigate such dataset. If you use no tools, no special techniques for requirements management, we may end up with a lot of mess, with chaos instead of good requirements. And if the set of requirements is somehow incomplete or fragmented or has blind spots, it is extremely hard to navigate and understand all this. Once again, imagine that we have several requirements sets, several documents, something like that. Of course, there will be cross-references, links in a good situation, that something depends on something. If I am here, how can I get there, and so on. But if such links are broken or do not exist, or maybe some links leads here but should lead here, it is hard. We have to spend a lot of time. Each time we need to find something. Each time we need to change something. Each time we are working with requirements. So here follows obvious ways of detection the traceability problems. If some questions like that arise every day, a lot of times, and we have no answers for them, that is the problem. So how to fix? Rework the requirements, create structure, arrange cross-reference, add text, add bookmarks, etc., 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 etc. Use every functionality your tool provides you with. And we should absolutely remember that any requirement, any set of requirements may be and should be modified during the whole life cycle of the project. So, how easy is it for us to make those changes? How easy is it to modify any given requirement or set of requirements? Changes go well without unexpected side effects with good modifiability. Without modifiability, those side effects appear often. So, typical problems here. If requirements are non-atomic or untraceable, any change may lead to inconsistency, to chaos. If requirements are contradictory, any change only worsens the situation. If requirements are in some inconvenient form with wrong management tool and so on, the teamwork becomes the hell, and hundreds of mistakes would be surely made. How to understand that there are troubles with the modifiability? No traceability, rewind for a couple of minutes back if you need. No modifiability. And the modifiability decreases with the violation of almost any other good requirement property. So how to fix? Rewrite with the primary goal to increase the traceability. Once we get the traceability, the modifiability will magically appear. And of course, while doing this, we can fix a lot of other problems in documentation and improve our documentation a lot. And we shall finish the good requirements properties review in the third video.